Imagine sitting at a lavish dinner on a luxury cruise, raising your glass of wine, when a waitress slips you a folded note that changes everything. I just saw her put something into your drink. In that instant, your heartbeat drowns out the music, and every instinct screams at you to act fast. What would you do? Trust the smiling woman who calls you family? Or trust the stranger who risks her job to warn you? I switched our glasses, and in that single decision, the predator who had been poisoning me for months tasted her own trap. What followed was darker, more twisted, and more horrifying than I ever imagined. This is not just a story about betrayal. It is about survival, about uncovering the monster hiding behind the sweetest smile. Stay with me, because you will not believe how deep this deception went. And remember, subscribe to Silent Lies so you never miss the truth lurking in the shadows. The night it all began felt so ordinary, so deceptively normal, that I still find myself replaying it in my mind, searching for the warning signs I ignored. A Tuesday evening, my son Elliot called with a brightness in his voice I had not heard in years. He wanted me to meet someone. "She's special, Mom," he said, his words laced with an excitement that made my heart ache with both hope and dread. For so long he had been consumed by his tech empire, working 18-hour days, his laughter replaced with curt phone calls and holiday visits that felt like obligations rather than reunions. Suddenly, he sounded like the boy I used to know, the one who pedaled down our street on a shiny new bike, grinning with pride. I said yes, of course. What mother could refuse? Saturday night came, and I spent far too long in front of the mirror, fretting over dresses and jewelry. I wanted to look polished but not desperate, elegant but not showy. It had been years since I worried about first impressions, yet here I was, fussing like a schoolgirl. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was the silent house that had pressed on me since Richard, my husband, passed away. Whatever the reason, I wanted Elliot's new love to see me as more than just the grieving widow who rattled around in a mansion too big for her own footsteps. The restaurant was one of those intimidating places with hushed voices and waiters who glide instead of walk. I was adjusting the napkin in my lap when Elliot entered, and for a moment I didn't breathe. His hand was entwined with hers, a woman so breathtakingly beautiful she seemed plucked from the glossy pages of a fashion magazine. Tall, radiant, hair styled with the kind of perfection that money buys, she exuded an effortless charm that made the other women glance at her and check their lipstick. "Mom, this is Ava," Elliot said, his face glowing in a way that almost made me forgive the years of distance. Ava extended a manicured hand, her smile warm, her grip just right, neither limp nor overbearing. "Mrs. Bennet, I've heard so much about you," she purred, her voice threaded with admiration. She complimented my earrings, asked about Richard's career, leaned in with genuine interest when I spoke of my charity work. Every word from her mouth was honeyed, every gesture polished, yet natural enough that I wanted to believe in her sincerity. I should have seen it then. I should have recognized how perfectly scripted it all was. But grief makes you crave connection, and loneliness dulls your instincts. When she reached across the table, placed her warm hand over mine, and begged me to join them on a Caribbean cruise, my resistance collapsed. Future mother-in-law, those were the words she used, wrapping me in the kind of belonging I had been yearning for. Elliot looked startled, but Ava's insistence was irresistible. She wanted me there. She wanted to build a bond, and I wanted it too badly to say no. From that night forward, she became a fixture in my life. Coffee dates where she laughed at my late husband's corny jokes, shopping trips where she valued my opinion, long lunches where she encouraged me to order dessert. She was everything I thought I wanted in a daughter-in-law. Attentive, kind, eager to include me. My empty house felt less suffocating when she was around, and I found myself smiling more, talking more, even daring to feel less invisible. But Ava was no ordinary young woman. She had a way of inhabiting my home that unsettled me in ways I pushed aside. She walked through my rooms with the wide-eyed wonder of someone touring a palace, her fingertips brushing the marble counters, her eyes lingering on the chandelier Richard had bought me. When she settled into his old leather chair in the study, it felt disturbingly natural, as though she were rehearsing for a role she planned to own. "This isn't just a house," she whispered reverently. "It's a dream. Someone could live here forever." The way her voice wrapped around that word forever should have chilled me. It did, for a fleeting second, but I silenced the unease. I made the mistake of trusting her too much, too soon. At a department store one afternoon, I left my purse with her while I ducked into the restroom. When I returned, everything appeared untouched: wallet, keys, pill organizer. She stood smiling in a pair of sunglasses that made her look like a starlet. I thanked her without hesitation. Only later would I understand that moment had given her access to everything: my medications, my identification, the delicate threads of my life. Still, I welcomed her deeper into my world. We strolled through boutiques as she asked about Richard's habits, my finances, my health. She seemed endlessly fascinated by me, and I mistook her curiosity for affection. The truth is, I was starved for companionship. Her interest felt like oxygen to someone who had been drowning in silence. The first signs of trouble began subtly. I dismissed them as fatigue, stress, the inevitable decline of aging. A lapse in memory here, a moment of disorientation there. Standing in my own bathroom, unable to recognize it, failing to recall the name of a neighbor I had known for decades. At first I laughed it off, teased myself for being scatterbrained, but the fear grew each time it happened. When I confided in Elliot, he brushed it aside. "It's stress, Mom. You need a vacation," he said, distracted as always by his work. And then Ava's voice chimed in over the phone, soothing and warm, telling me her uncle had gone through something similar, that it was all just age catching up. "The ocean air will do wonders," she promised. Her reassurance was perfect, practiced, and it sank into me like a lullaby. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was the answer to the loneliness that had haunted me since Richard's death, but the cracks were already forming. Each slip of memory, each tremor of confusion was not an accident. They were orchestrated. And though I did not yet know it, the woman who held my hand and called me family was quietly dismantling my sanity, one carefully measured dose at a time. The first true tremor in the facade came quietly, like a draft through a closed window. I woke in the guest bathroom just before dawn, the marble cold beneath my bare feet, my nightgown clinging to my skin. For several suspended seconds I did not know where I was, who I was, or why the woman in the mirror looked so frightened. I gripped the counter until my knuckles blanched and coached my breath back into my lungs. "This is your house, Rose. You have lived here for decades." The words steadied me, but a thin thread of panic remained, humming in the background like a distant alarm. I told myself it was stress. I told myself that planning a cruise, confronting the idea of sharing close quarters with my son and his luminous fiancée, and the relentless echo of an empty home had simply frayed the edges of my mind. When I ran into my neighbor at the supermarket later that day and could not summon her name, humiliation crawled up my spine. This was a woman who had stood in my kitchen after Richard's funeral, holding my hand while the coffee went cold. I smiled, I deflected, I said I was tired. She looked at me with a tenderness that tasted like pity. When I relayed the odd episodes to Elliot over the phone, I kept my voice light, as if I were confiding a harmless quirk, not a creeping terror. He said it was stress, and told me a vacation would do me good. I heard keys clacking in the background. Then Ava's voice floated in, warm and butter-smooth. She said her uncle had experienced similar lapses when age began to press on him. She said sea air could be medicine. She said I deserved a beautiful escape. It was the perfect answer to the exact fear I had not fully named, and it slid into place with unnerving ease. The days leading up to the cruise unfolded in a pleasant blur that should have comforted me. Ava made everything feel effortless. She arrived with soup and flowers, arranged appointments I had put off, insisted on carrying my purse because she said I should rest my shoulders. She repeated it with soft emphasis, as if my shoulders carried a weight she could lift. Her attention was so complete that it almost erased my unease. Almost. The ship itself was an extravagant promise made of glass and light. Boarding in Miami felt like stepping into a fantasy where time bent, where the ocean wiped clean all sharp edges. The lobby's waterfall murmured, the elevators shimmered, and everywhere I looked was the polish of other people's anticipation. Ava moved through it like it had been built for her. She clasped my arm, pointed out the flowers and the piano and the balcony that looked over the endless blue. Elliot, by contrast, watched his phone the way a drowning man watches the surface of the water. He slid it into his pocket when I touched his sleeve, but the frown remained in the lines around his eyes. That first dinner under the vaulted ceiling, the crystal throwing tiny stars across white linen, should have been the memory I kept. Instead, what lodged in me was a sense of performance. I could not tell if I was the audience or the stage. Ava was bright, charming, careful. Elliot was present in fragments, a man who had pressed mute on a life he could not stop hearing. We walked the promenade afterward, the moon dragging a path over the waves like a silver chain, and I told myself that the disquiet was nothing more than my imagination looking for shadows where none existed. The walls between our cabins were thinner than I expected. That night, I lay still and listened to the shuffle of movement next door, the murmur of voices that rose and fell like surf. Elliot's voice was low and strained. He said something about a timeline he had never agreed to. Ava's reply was sharper, urgent, a wire pulled taut. Plans change. We do not have a choice. The rest collapsed into whispers as if the ship itself leaned in to listen. Paper rustled, a drawer shut. Silence spread, wide and humming. I stared at the ceiling and tried to make logical shapes out of the words they had left me. All I managed to build was dread. By the third day at sea, the fog inside my head had thickened. I woke on the open deck at 3 a.m, the ocean stretching to the edge of the world, the wind cutting through my thin pajamas. I did not know how I had arrived there, only that the rail felt cold and terribly final beneath my fingers. A security guard with a careful voice escorted me back to my cabin. His gentleness was a mirror I hated, reflecting me as an elderly woman teetering on the edge of a fall she would not see coming. I thanked him. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed until the horizon paled. At breakfast, Ava slid into the seat across from me with a brightness that made the room tilt. She said I looked tired and pressed a tall glass of orange juice into my hands as if it were an amulet. She reminded me to take my morning medications, and I obeyed because obedience is easy when your thoughts move like heavy syrup. I noticed, distantly, that the pills looked slightly different than I remembered. The ship's doctor later told me that generic manufacturers changed coatings and dyes all the time. He said there was nothing to worry about. The certainty in his tone settled me like a hand on my shoulder. A pattern emerged that I refused to name. After each episode, Ava appeared as if summoned by my confusion. She organized my day, carried my purse, folded my card key into her palm with a smile, and told me I should let myself be taken care of for once. I wanted that. I wanted it so much I built a house in the wanting and moved in. Yet unease kept scratching at the door. It seemed harmless to ask small questions and then chastise myself for the answers. Why did Ava always know where everything was in my room? How could a teacher afford gowns that looked like they belonged on red carpets? Why did Elliot flinch at messages from home and then make jokes about it to avoid my eyes? None of it was damning on its own. Together, it was a chorus I could not quite hear, singing a song I almost recognized. One afternoon, when they went to the spa for a couple's massage, I closed my eyes to nap, but their whispered conversation from the night before threaded through my mind. Timeline. Plan. No choice. I found my purse at the foot of the bed where Ava had placed it earlier with gentle authority. I opened it as though it belonged to someone else. Everything looked right. Everything looked wrong. I counted pills and told myself I was being paranoid. I placed them back and lined them up so neatly that the order itself felt like a compulsion. At lunch, Ava returned floaty with happiness and insisted on ordering for me because she said my appetite had been fickle. She spoke to the waiter with a confidence that read as kindness and kept one hand lightly on my forearm as if her touch could anchor me. Elliot was quieter than usual, his smile tight, his eyes moving often to the entrance, as though he expected something or someone that never arrived. When I told a story, I faltered in the middle, unable to find the last sentence that would have tied it together. Ava jumped in, finishing for me with a lilting laugh that sounded like relief. That evening was formal night, the ship dressed like a chandelier. I fastened my navy dress and watched my face in the mirror, trying to decide whether the woman looking back belonged in the room I was about to enter. Ava appeared at my door in gold sequins that caught the light and threw it across the floor. She adjusted a strand of my hair, stepped back, declared me elegant, and looped her arm through mine as if we had been practicing the movement for weeks. Elliot joined us in the corridor and admired her with a softness that made my throat ache. For a while, the music and the conversation and the choreography of dinner formed a cage for my thoughts, pretty and safe. Then the cage bent. When the band struck a familiar song, Ava coaxed Elliot to the dance floor. I watched them move together, her grace smoothing his awkwardness, their heads close, their bodies perfectly timed. It should have warmed me. Instead, something cold slid under my ribs. I could not have explained it then. I can now. There was calculation in her ease, purpose in the gentle pressure of her hand against his shoulder. I turned to my glass of wine and forced the worry to heel like a disobedient dog. The stem felt fragile in my hand, the surface of the liquid dark as a secret. I took a small sip, set it down, and breathed. A member of the waitstaff drifted toward me, all professionalism and hush, and opened a leather-bound menu with a serene smile. I frowned, surprised. I had not requested a dessert list. The page hid a folded napkin the color of bone. I had not yet unfolded it. I had not yet read the words that would split my life into a before and an after. In that suspended moment, with the chandelier breathing light over everything, the future hovered an inch away from my fingertips, waiting. The waitress's note sat like fire against my palm, hidden within the folds of the menu. My name written in hurried blue ink, the warning so stark I almost forgot how to breathe. I just saw her put something into your drink. Don't react. Switch glasses. The chandeliers glittered overhead, as though mocking me, scattering light across the polished silver and crystal. Around me, diners laughed, oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just tilted into darkness. I forced myself to nod at the waitress, to appear calm, while my insides screamed with terror. She slipped away with professional grace, leaving me alone with the knowledge that the woman I had trusted, the woman who called me family, had been poisoning me all along. On the dance floor, Ava twirled under the soft glow of the lights, her golden dress casting sparks with every movement. Elliot's awkward steps were smoothed by her practiced grace, and from a distance they looked like the perfect couple. I gripped the stem of my wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. 2 glasses sat before me, identical, innocent, deadly. I did not hesitate. I slid them into each other's place. When they returned minutes later, breathless and smiling, Ava reached for the glass now resting at her side. "To family," she said brightly, lifting it with a smile that could have disarmed anyone. Elliot echoed her words, clinking his glass against hers. I raised mine, hiding the tremor in my hand, and watched her drink. For the first time in months, I felt something other than fear. I felt vindication. At first it was subtle, a blink that lingered too long, a tiny furrow between her brows. She touched her forehead lightly and murmured something about the room feeling warm. Elliot leaned in, concern already clouding his features. I said nothing. I watched. 10 minutes later, her words began to slur, the edges of her sentences softening like melting wax. "The lights," she giggled, tilting her head back at the chandelier. "They're dancing like diamonds, Rose. Do you see them? Dancing diamonds?" Her laughter rang out, drawing stares from nearby tables. Elliot frowned, setting down his fork. "Ava, are you all right? You've barely had anything to drink." She swayed in her chair, her pupils blown wide. "I feel floaty," she murmured, struggling to keep her balance. "Like clouds, secrets in the ocean." Her nonsense grew louder, sloppier, impossible to ignore. Other diners whispered behind their hands, their glances sharp with discomfort. Elliot rushed to her side, embarrassed and frightened. She clung to him, her words tumbling out in broken fragments. "Secrets. Rose should know, they're hers too." My heart seized. Was she about to confess? Even drugged, she circled dangerously close to the truth. Elliot tried to quiet her, tried to guide her toward the elevator, but her rambling carried across the dining room like a siren. I sat frozen, watching as the woman who had been dismantling my sanity for months exposed herself in the most public way imaginable. She was unraveling under the same poison she had intended for me. And it was almost poetic. The moment they disappeared into the elevator, I searched the room for the waitress. She was clearing tables, moving swiftly. But when she caught my eye, she came to me immediately. "I've been watching her for 2 days, she whispered, her voice urgent but steady. "She's been tampering with your drinks. I knew something was wrong." My legs trembled beneath me. "Help me prove it," I begged. She nodded without hesitation. "There are cameras everywhere. Security will have it all." The ship's security office smelled faintly of coffee and metal. The chief, a man with steel-gray hair and an expression carved from stone, sat us in front of a bank of monitors. When the footage began, I felt my stomach lurch. There she was pausing at the bar, her movements smooth, calculated. She pulled a tiny vial from her purse, tapped white powder into a glass of wine, stirred quickly, and carried it back to our table with a smile so radiant it could blind. The waitress pointed. "That's the one. She set it in front of you." My throat closed. Watching myself on that screen, smiling, oblivious, reaching for a poisoned glass, was like staring at a ghost. The security chief's jaw tightened. "This is attempted poisoning, possibly attempted murder. We'll search their cabin immediately." What followed was a blur of footsteps, radios crackling, doors opening. I stood in the hallway as officers entered Elliot and Ava's suite. My son appeared, disheveled, confusion written all over his face. "Mom, what's going on?" His voice cracked with fear. I wanted to run to him, to believe he was innocent, but doubt gnawed at me. How much had he known? How much had she told him? Inside the cabin, they found the evidence. Vials of liquid hidden among lingerie. A prescription bottle identical to mine, but filled with counterfeit pills. And then the most damning of all, videos on her tablet. Clips of me stumbling in my kitchen, forgetting words, looking lost. A carefully curated archive of my supposed decline, built to prove I was incompetent. The reality hit me like a blade had been documenting my destruction, preparing to strip me of everything, my freedom, my finances, my dignity. Elliot stared at the evidence, horror dawning in his eyes. "Ava, what is this? What have you done?" But she could barely form words, her drugged state leaving her incoherent. "It's not what it looks like," she slurred, her beauty crumbling into something grotesque. The security chief snapped his gloves off. "She's been poisoning your mother." And given the evidence, I'd say this wasn't her first time. I could not look at my son. I could not bear the question lodged between us. Had he been complicit, or had he been blind, like me? By the time they led Ava away, the answer didn't matter. What mattered was survival. What mattered was that I had finally seen her clearly, not as the daughter I thought I had gained, but as the predator she truly was. They brought me into the small conference room on the ship where the air felt heavy with truth waiting to be spoken. Ava lay groggy in her cabin under watch, drifting between consciousness and incoherent muttering, while Elliot sat pale and shaken, his hands trembling against the table. The security chief turned toward me, his voice calm but firm. "We've contacted the authorities at the next port. She'll be taken into custody. But before that, Mrs. Bennett, you need to understand what we've uncovered." I braced myself. My chest felt hollow, as though my heart had slipped into my stomach. The officers laid out the evidence on the table. The counterfeit medication bottles, the small vials of clear liquid, and the tablet glowing with the cruel proof of Ava's manipulation. My own face stared back at me from the screen. Confused, stumbling, speaking nonsense. I flinched at the sight. "She was documenting your decline," the chief said, "creating a record that could be used in court to have you declared incompetent." The words echoed, slow and deliberate. Declared incompetent. I imagined my son signing papers, believing it was best for me, while Ava slid into my home and my bank accounts with the same grace she had slipped her hand into mine. Elliot buried his face in his hands. "God, Mom, I thought you were just getting older. I thought she was helping you." His voice cracked, a broken thing. He looked at me with tears sliding down his cheeks. "I swear to you, I didn't know." I wanted to believe him. Every part of me wanted to cling to the boy I had raised, the boy who once promised to protect me after Richard died. But doubt had roots now, deep and gnawing. Ava had twisted every part of our lives into her game, and trust felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. The ship docked in Miami under a veil of gray clouds, and police officers boarded with brisk efficiency. Detective Maria Santos introduced herself with a sharp gaze and a voice that carried no room for illusions. "We've run her fingerprints. Ava Mitchell is an alias. Her real name is Ava Richardson, and she has a history." She spread photographs across the table, mugshots, driver's licenses, surveillance stills. My stomach turned as if the ground beneath me were collapsing. 7 years of fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, Santos explained. "She's targeted wealthy older individuals before, at least 3 that we can confirm." She slid a photo closer. "Robert Hughes, 62, contractor from Tampa, married her 18 months ago, died 8 months ago of a supposed heart attack. Family contested the will, said he'd been acting strangely for months. She inherited $400,000 and his home." Elliot's face drained of color. "She told me she'd never been married." His words were a whisper, like air escaping a punctured balloon. "There's more," Santos continued, her tone unforgiving. "She had an uncle, Edward Richardson, committed to a psychiatric facility after sudden dementia-like symptoms. Ava was his primary caregiver. She now controls his finances. Since being moved to a new facility, his condition has improved significantly. Doctors suspect the original diagnosis was manipulated." My hands shook so violently I had to clutch them in my lap. This was her pattern. Poison, confusion, isolation, inheritance. A practiced predator who slipped into lives with a smile and left them in ruin. Elliot slammed his fist against the table. If she could do this to you, Mom, what was she planning for me? Detective Santos met his eyes with grim certainty. You would have been next. Once your mother was declared incompetent or worse, she'd move on to you. A tragic accident, perhaps. Carbon monoxide poisoning. An allergic reaction. Something tidy. Something that left her as your widow and sole heir. The words hollowed me out. My son, my only living family, had been marked as prey as surely as I had. When they finally escorted Ava off the ship in handcuffs, she lifted her head and locked eyes with me. Her beauty had not vanished, but it had curdled, revealing the predator beneath the mask. I cared about you, Rose, she called out, her voice dripping with the same sweetness that once wrapped around my loneliness. You have to believe that. I did not believe her. Love does not destroy. Care does not poison. Family does not plot your slow death while holding your hand at dinner. At the hospital in Miami, the toxicologist explained the grim truth. She was giving you a cocktail of drugs designed to mimic dementia. Small doses carefully managed. Cumulative. Another few months, and the damage might have been irreversible. I sat silently, the sterile light casting harsh shadows across the room, while Elliot hovered beside me, guilt etched into every line of his face. He brought me magazines I did not read, held my hand when doctors prodded and poked, whispered apologies into the quiet between machines. I should have seen it, he said one evening. She knew everything, your pills, your finances, your routines. I thought she was protecting you. I thought she was helping. God, Mom, I was blind. I wanted to absolve him, but the truth was jagged. Ava had played him perfectly, made his concern her weapon. Trust had been weaponized, love had been twisted, and it would take time before either of us could breathe without tasting betrayal. The police investigation unearthed more horrors. Months of preparation, research into my life, orchestrated meetings that had never been accidents. Every kindness had been calculation. Every smile had been sharpened to cut. She had built a future on the bones of my family, and she would have succeeded if not for a single brave waitress who refused to look away. When the sentence was handed down, 25 years for attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, I thought I would feel triumph. Instead, I felt a strange quiet. Justice, yes. Relief, perhaps. But also grief for the woman I had wanted her to be, the daughter I had imagined in my emptiness. Sometimes the deepest lies are the ones we tell ourselves. The day the verdict came down, the courtroom felt colder than the hospital rooms where I had listened to toxicology reports. The judge read a list of charges that seemed to go on forever, each word a step further away from the future Ava had tried to script for us. Attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, elder abuse. 25 years. I watched the numbers settle on her shoulders like chains, and I waited for triumph, for the righteous surge that movies promise at the end of a long ordeal. Instead, I felt only a solemn stillness that reached down to the marrow. The gavel fell. The sound was strangely small. Ava lifted her chin as the deputies approached, her beauty intact, as if defiance itself were a kind of makeup. When they turned her to lead her away, she glanced back over her shoulder. Her eyes found mine, steady and unblinking, and for a heartbeat the room fell away. She mouthed something I could not hear. The words could have been an apology or a curse. I decided they were nothing at all. Afterward, the corridors outside the courtroom smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. Elliot took my hand, not loosely as if I were fragile, but firmly, as if he needed the contact to anchor himself. He looked older than he had 2 months ago, as if a hard winter had passed through him alone. We go home now, he said. Not a question. A promise. Home. The word bent light around it. My house did not feel like a house at first. It felt like the site of a trespass, the place where a ghost had rearranged the furniture and hidden poison in the spaces that were supposed to be safe. Elliot carried my bags in and set them down with a carefulness that made me ache. He moved through the rooms without the false cheer people use to pretend that nothing has changed. In the kitchen, he opened the pill cabinet, removed every bottle, and placed them in a neat line on the counter. We reviewed each label the way soldiers review a map before crossing a minefield. The first night back, I slept in my own bed and woke twice to the sound of silence. It was astonishing how loud silence could be when you had nearly lost the right to hear it. I got up and walked the house, touching door frames, brushing knuckles along the marble, laying my palm against Richard's leather chair in the study until the familiar creak acknowledged me. The rooms did not speak words. but they offered recognition, and that was almost enough. Elliot settled into the study with his laptop and a determination that drew new lines into his face. He told his partners that he would take a step back. He did not couch it in corporate niceties. He simply stated the boundary and refused to negotiate against himself. Meetings shrank. Emails lost their urgency. He learned the shape of the afternoon light on the kitchen floor, the timing of the kettle's quiet whistle, the way the house exhaled when the air conditioner shut off. He learned the rhythm of living with me, not as a duty, but as a choice. One evening, he rolled a spare cot into the study and never took it back out. He did not leave a toothbrush at my house. He left his life. Recovery, I learned, is rarely cinematic. It is a patient untangling, as slow and precise as unraveling a knot in a necklace you cannot bear to lose. The toxicologist drew blood and spoke of half-lives and cumulative burdens. The neurologist set small tasks that felt embarrassing at first, then holy. Recite a list of 5 words. Draw a clock face. Remember a sequence after a brief distraction. The exercises were simple and stubborn. Some days I excelled, other days I stalled. The failures pressed like thumbs on bruises. But progress did not abandon me. Elliot kept a journal on a legal pad, not as an overseer but as a witness. He recorded each appointment, each improvement, each backward step reframed as an ordinary detour rather than a definitive slide. When I faltered, he read the entries back to me. An anchor cast into the waters behind us. You forgot the neighbor's name on Tuesday. On Thursday you remembered the name and her grandchild's birthday, he would say. That is what movement looks like. I returned to ordinary rituals the way a diver returns to air. I brewed tea and read the first paragraph of a novel twice before the story hooked. I watered the philodendron in the corner and did not cry when I realized I had been overwatering it for weeks. I attended an exercise class for seniors where the instructor's enthusiasm warmed me like sunlight through glass. These were small victories, too small to announce, but I collected them quietly until the shelves inside me felt sturdy again. The police continued their work, following evidence into the past. I learned to accept updates like weather reports, a reopened case in Tampa, a search warrant for a storage unit in a distant city, a hospital chart that looked different under a second set of eyes. There was no glee in me, only a clear-eyed steadiness. Justice is not a feast. It is bread and water that keeps you moving. As for the waitress on the ship, I wrote her name on a slip of paper and kept it in my wallet, not as a talisman, but as a reminder that the world is not built solely of predators and victims. I called the cruise line and asked if I could send a letter to her manager. Words felt insufficient, so I sent actions instead. A scholarship for hospitality students in her name, quiet and practical, because courage should ripple outward. The hardest work, as I had feared, lived between my son and me. Betrayal does not only belong to the one who betrays. It leaves stains on those who did not stop it in time. Elliot apologized 100 different ways, none of them rehearsed, all of them raw. I listened. Then, slowly, I spoke. I told him that my fear had not been of him, but of the way Ava had used his love as a tool. I told him that grief had left us both hungry, and hunger is a dangerous counsel. We sat on the back patio at dusk, mosquitoes ticking at the edge of the world, and mapped a new kind of closeness, not built on obligation or performance, but on ordinary presence. He cooked badly and improved. I nagged gently and learned when to be quiet. We laughed at the wrong moments and the right ones, and by winter the laughter no longer sounded like something borrowed. Sometimes, late at night, I replayed the moment at the table, the 2 glasses gleaming like a choice delivered by fate. People tell themselves they would always know, that evil wears a costume easy to spot. I know better now. Evil can smell like perfume and ask about your volunteer work. It can hold your hand and schedule your doctor's appointments and say the word family with perfect intonation. It can smile as it studies how to dismantle you. The lesson is not to distrust everyone. The lesson is to listen when the smallest voice inside you whispers an objection. The lesson is to keep your life in your own hands whenever you can. In time, the house stopped feeling haunted. I opened the study windows one morning and the breeze lifted the curtains like sails. The chandelier in the foyer caught the light and threw it in bright, harmless pieces across the floor. I stood under it and did not think of a dining room on a ship or diamonds dancing in the air. I thought of breakfast. I thought of calling my neighbor by her name. I thought of the long, ordinary day ahead, unremarkable, and therefore precious. People asked whether I hated Ava. Hate is heavy, and I was tired of carrying things that wanted me to drown. I chose something else. I chose attention. I watched the caregivers who came into my orbit with a mind as awake as my heart. I kept separate pill organizers and a notebook with the shape of each tablet sketched inside. I asked questions I would once have considered impolite. It turns out that vigilance can be gentle, and boundaries can be kind. The woman who tried to hollow out my life did not win. That is not because I am remarkable. It is because a stranger chose to see me and act, and because I chose, at the last moment, to trust a warning more than a smile. That choice did not make me fearless. It made me free enough to reclaim the parts of myself that were never hers to begin with. One evening, Elliot stood in the doorway of the study, with 2 mugs of tea steaming between his hands. He looked at Richard's chair, then at me. "I almost lost you," he said. The words were quiet, unsentimental, and perfectly true. I took a mug and breathed in the scent. "Then do not," I answered. He nodded and sat. We watched the sun melt into the line of trees behind the house, and for a long time we did not speak. We did not need to. Presence can be a language when speech is unnecessary. When sleep came that night, it arrived softly, without the stuttering shock of old alarms. No wandering hallways in a nightgown. No waking under the blank enormity of the ocean sky. Only the steady breath of a house that knew my name, and the memory of a glass that I had the good sense to move an inch to the left. Miami's skyline shimmered through the hospital window, a sharp reminder that the world outside still spun, indifferent to the wreckage inside me. The toxicology results came back with precision that was both terrifying and vindicating. A cocktail of drugs engineered to mimic dementia, to erode memory, to fracture reality piece by piece had been living inside my body for months. "You were lucky, Doctor," Williams told me, her voice low but steady. "Another few months of exposure, and some of the damage could have been irreversible." Lucky. The word clung to me like smoke. I did not feel lucky. I felt violated, hollowed out, as if someone had been carving away at me with a scalpel while whispering reassurances in my ear. Yet I was alive, and Sheth, a woman who smiled and called me family, was behind bars. That counted for something. Elliot sat beside me through every test, his hand wrapped around mine as if sheer contact could erase the months of betrayal. He looked worn, like someone who had aged years in weeks. His apologies came not in rehearsed speeches but in small, broken fragments. "I should have noticed. I should have protected you. I should have seen her for what she was." Each word lodged inside me, painful but true. I told him I understood, though in truth, understanding was a shifting terrain. The investigation into Ava's past unfurled like a grotesque tapestry. She had researched us for months before orchestrating her accidental meeting with Elliot. She had studied my finances, my routines, my vulnerabilities. She had crafted herself into the perfect daughter-in-law. Attentive, sweet, the balm for my loneliness. Every laugh we shared, every shopping trip, every kind gesture had been a thread in her design. It was not companionship. It was construction. Detective Santos returned with updates, her voice as sharp as the photographs she spread across the table. "She perfected a pattern," the detective explained. "Identify wealthy, isolated individuals, gain their trust, introduce subtle cognitive symptoms through carefully measured doses, build a case file of evidence videos, notes, testimony from neighbors to declare them incompetent. Then she gains control of the estate or moves in as caretaker. When the timing is right, the victim dies quietly, tragically, with little suspicion." I stared at the photos of her past victims. Robert Hughes, dead at 62. Edward Richardson, shuffled into a care facility until the drugs faded from his system. The faces of men who had once believed her lies, who had once welcomed her into their homes, haunted me. I realized then that if I had not switched those glasses, I would have been the next photograph in her gallery of destruction. Elliot sat rigid, his fists clenched. "If she had succeeded with my mother," he whispered, "I would have been next, wouldn't I?" Santos didn't flinch. "That was the pattern. A tragic accident after your mother's decline, something that left her as your widow and sole heir. The estate would have been hers. Everything you and your father built would have vanished into her hands." The weight of that truth pressed down on both of us. Elliot looked at me with eyes that burned from sleepless nights. "She almost destroyed us," he said. "She almost took everything. But she hadn't. And that mattered." The sentencing was swift. 25 years. A predator caged. Yet as she was led away, she turned, her voice carrying the same syrupy tone she had once used to offer me soup in my kitchen. "I did care about you, Rose," she said. For a flicker of a second, I saw the mask she had worn, the daughter I thought I had gained, the future I had imagined. Then the mask cracked, and all that remained was the predator beneath. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. My memory sharpened as the drugs leached from my body. I took control of my medications, labeling each bottle, sketching each pill in a notebook so that no one could ever tamper with them again. I learned to ask hard questions, to keep boundaries even when it felt impolite. Vigilance became a form of self-respect. Elliot moved into Richard's old study, transforming it into a home office but also a sanctuary. He cooked clumsy dinners, burnt toast and overcooked pasta that still managed to taste like love. We laughed again, tentatively at first, then fully, as if laughter itself was a muscle we were exercising back into strength. For years, grief and distance had hollowed out our relationship. Ava's betrayal, twisted as it was, forced us to face what we still meant to each other. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Elliot set down his fork and looked at me with an expression raw and unguarded. "I almost lost you," he said. His voice cracked. "I'm not letting that happen again." I reached across the table, taking his hand. "Then don't," I replied simply. And in that moment, we weren't mother and son fractured by time and manipulation. We were survivors, bound not by blood alone but by the fire we had walked through together. Life slowly regained texture. The house, once a stage for deception, felt like mine again. I opened curtains to let the light spill in. I cooked Richard's old recipes, filling the kitchen with the smells of garlic and rosemary. I walked through the garden in the mornings, the air sharp with dew, and whispered to myself the truth I had almost forgotten. I am still here. I am still me. Ava wanted to live in my home forever, to inhabit the life Richard and I built. Instead, she would spend her years behind bars, her beauty fading under fluorescent lights and steel doors. Her dream of permanence became a cage, while mine became freedom reclaimed. Sometimes, late at night, I stand in front of the chandelier she once admired and watch the light fracture into harmless prisms. I think about the waitress, about the courage it took to slip me that note, about how her quiet act of defiance saved not just my life but possibly Elliot's as well. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they carry trays and menus. I survived because of her, because of a decision made in an instant, because I trusted a stranger over a smile. That choice rewrote everything. And now, I live with a clarity Ava never intended me to have. The clarity to see through the performance of charm. The clarity to cherish the ordinary moments, tea on the patio, Elliot's laugh echoing through the house, the quiet comfort of belonging in my own skin. She tried to dismantle me, but instead she gave me something I had forgotten, proof that I am stronger than the lies whispered in the dark. When I look back now, it feels surreal, like my life had been hijacked and turned into someone else's twisted script. A woman I welcomed into my home, trusted with my secrets, and called family had been plotting to erase me from my own life. She studied me, poisoned me, made me doubt my mind, and almost succeeded in stealing everything I loved. But the truth is, she failed. Not because I was unbreakable, but because of one fragile moment of courage. A waitress who refused to stay silent. A note slipped between pages of a menu changed everything. It gave me the chance to fight back, to reclaim myself, and to see the predator hiding behind the sweetest smile. I survived. But survival is not just breathing. Survival is rebuilding. It is taking the broken pieces and arranging them into something new, stronger, sharper. It is laughing with my son again over burnt toast, walking through my home without fear, and waking each morning grateful that my mind is my own. Ava wanted permanence. She wanted to live forever in the life Richard and I built. Instead, she will spend decades in a cell, while I spend my years free to love, free to trust carefully, free to live. Her lies tried to hollow me out, but in the end, they gave me clarity. And here is what I know now. Monsters rarely look like monsters. They look like friends, lovers, caretakers, even family. They smile, they reassure. They weave themselves into your days until you cannot tell where they end and you begin. But if you listen closely, if you pay attention, there are always cracks, always signs, always that one small voice inside you whispering that something is wrong. Do not ignore it, because the cost of silence can be your life. I share my story because it is not just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever been betrayed by someone they trusted most. It belongs to anyone who has felt their reality slipping, only to realize someone else was pulling the strings. and it belongs to those who need to hear that survival is possible even when the darkness is deep and the lies are suffocating. If my story has taught you anything, let it be this. Stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of one brave act. And if you want more stories like this, stories that peel back the polished surface to reveal the dark truths hiding underneath, subscribe to Silent Lies. Because the world is full of predators in disguise, and the only way to protect ourselves is to bring their shadows into the light.